The moment Ángel Torres saw the uniformed officer step out of the white vehicle with Border Patrol emblazoned on its side, relief flooded through him like water in the desert. The worst was over. They'd been caught, but at least they'd be processed and deported safely rather than dying of thirst in the Arizona wilderness. 3 hours later, locked in a warehouse that smelled of motor oil and fear, watching armed men sort through their documents while discussing prices on phones, Ángel understood that the uniform had been a costume, the vehicle a prop, and their relief the cruelest joke played on desperate people who'd already gambled everything on reaching America. The real Border Patrol didn't drive for 3 hours into nowhere. They didn't have tinted windows, so dark you couldn't see out. They didn't confiscate phone for evidence, then negotiate ransoms with families. And they certainly didn't sort captured migrants into groups based on how much their relatives might pay for their release. But to understand how 8 Venezuelan refugees walked willingly into captivity, believing they were being rescued by American authorities, you need to go back to that December morning when the Sonoran Desert had already claimed 2 of their group and threatened to take the rest. Ángel had left Caracas with $12,000 sewn into the lining of his jacket. His family's entire savings plus loans they'd never be able to repay if he failed. At 31, with an engineering degree worthless in Venezuela's collapsed economy and a young son whose future depended on remittances, he joined the river of Venezuelans flowing north toward possibilities that seemed to shrink with each border crossed. The journey through Colombia, Panama, and Central America had depleted 3/4 of his funds. Each border demanded its toll, each corrupt official their bribe, each leg of transportation its inflated price. By the time he reached the Mexican border town of Altar, known as the last stop before the desert crossing, Ángel had $3,000 left, just enough for a coyote who promised safe passage to Phoenix. The group assembled in a safe house on Altar's outskirts included 8 Venezuelans, all professionals fleeing the same economic apocalypse. There was Carmen, a pediatrician whose hospital had closed when medicine ran out. The Morales brothers, both teachers, whose salaries wouldn't buy a week's food. Elena, an accountant. Jorge, a civil engineer like Ángel. All educated, all desperate, all trusting the same coyote who swore he'd crossed hundreds successfully. The plan seemed solid enough. 3-day walk through established routes. Water drops at known locations. A guide who knew every trail, every danger, every border patrol pattern. They'd cross at night, rest during the brutal daylight hours, reach a pickup point where vehicles would transport them to Phoenix. Difficult but doable, thousands had made it before them. What the coyote didn't mention was that he'd already been paid to abandon them. The first night's walk went according to plan. They covered 15 miles under stars, so clear they seemed fake to city dwellers' eyes. The guide moved confidently, pointing out landmarks, sharing stories of successful crossings. Their spirits were high despite the weight of backpacks and the uncertainty ahead. They were young, strong, motivated. The desert was just another obstacle to overcome. The second day brought the first death. Carlos, the younger Morales brother, had been struggling since dawn. The water that was supposed to last 3 days had been consumed too quickly in the overwhelming heat. By noon, with temperatures over 115 degrees, he was stumbling, speaking nonsense about snow in Caracas. His brother tried to share water, but there wasn't enough for generosity. By evening, Carlos was gone, his body left under a mesquite tree with a GPS coordinate they'd never be able to return to. That night, the guide disappeared. They woke to find his sleeping bag empty, no note, no explanation. Just 8 people in the middle of the Sonoran Desert with minimal water, no clear sense of direction, and a growing certainty that they'd been deliberately stranded. The GPS on their phones showed the location, but not where to go. Phoenix was somewhere north, but the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Elena was the next to fall. The accountant who'd managed million bolivar budgets couldn't calculate how to make a liter of water last in heat that turned the air itself into an enemy. She collapsed on the 3rd morning, her last word an apology for slowing them down. They left her with Carlos, 2 professionals reduced to statistics in the desert's accounting of human ambition. By the time the white vehicle appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust like a mechanical miracle, the remaining 6 were beyond desperate. Angel's tongue was swollen, his vision blurring. Jorge had stopped sweating, a danger sign. Carmen kept checking pulses that raced with dehydration. The older Morales brother hadn't spoken since leaving his sibling's body. They were dying, and they knew it. The vehicle looked official enough. White SUV with light bars on top, Border Patrol decals on the sides, 2 uniformed occupants visible through the windshield. It stopped 50 yards away, officers stepping out with the practiced caution of law enforcement approaching unknowns. One spoke through a megaphone in accented Spanish, ordering them to sit, hands visible, no sudden movements. Relief overwhelmed fear. They were caught, but caught meant water, meant medical attention, meant survival, even if it came with deportation. Ángel had never been happier to see American authority. They sat as ordered, hands raised, the universal gesture of surrender that felt like salvation. The officers approached professionally. Green uniforms that looked right, utility belts with equipment, even badges that glinted in the sun. They spoke decent Spanish, asking about weapons, drugs, anyone left behind. When told about Carlos and Elena, one officer radioed coordinates, said recovery teams would be notified. Everything seemed legitimate. They handed out water bottles, let them drink slowly to avoid shock, took basic information, names, nationalities, conditions. The female officer even checked Carmen's blood pressure, expressing concern about heat exhaustion. They were firm but not cruel, professional but not inhuman. Exactly what exhausted migrants hope for from American law enforcement. The vehicle's interior should have been the first warning. Real Border Patrol vehicles have caged rear compartments, visible computers, radio equipment. This one had tinted windows so dark the outside world vanished. Bench seats like a commercial van, no visible electronics except a basic radio. But dehydration and relief made critical thinking impossible. They climbed in gratefully, believing the nightmare was over. The ride started normally enough. Air conditioning that felt like heaven after the desert heat. The officers up front discussing logistics in English, occasionally asking questions about their journey. They said they were heading to a processing center in Tucson, about 2 hours away. Routine procedure, nothing to worry about. They'd be given food, medical care, legal orientation before deportation proceedings. After an hour, Angel's engineering mind began noticing inconsistencies. They weren't on any main highway. The ride was too rough, too many turns. The officers had stopped talking, stopped responding to questions. When Jorge asked how much further, the driver just grunted and kept driving. The humanitarian facade was slipping. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Still driving through increasingly remote terrain. No city lights, no signs of civilization. The other migrants were getting nervous, whispering concerns. Carmen mentioned that real Border Patrol would have reached any processing center by now. The Morales brother just stared at the blacked-out windows, perhaps already understanding what the others were slowly realizing. When they finally stopped, it wasn't at any government facility. The warehouse sat alone in the desert, surrounded by nothing but Joshua trees and darkness. No American flags, no official signage, just a metal building that could have been anywhere or nowhere. The officer's demeanor changed completely as they ordered everyone out. No more professional courtesy, just men with guns directing cargo. Inside, the truth became undeniable. Other migrants sat on the floor, some who'd been there days or weeks. Armed guards who didn't bother with uniform pretense. A operation that collected border crossers not for deportation, but for profit. The fake officers had been contractors, hunting the desert for valuable finds. And Venezuelan professionals with families who might pay ransom were very valuable indeed. They took everything. Phones, documents, money hidden in shoes and sewn into clothes. Ángel watched his last $3,000 disappear into someone's pocket. 12 years of savings gone in seconds. They were photographed, fingerprinted, their information recorded in ledgers like inventory. Then came the phone calls. Each migrant was forced to call family, explain their situation, beg for money. The amounts varied based on perceived ability to pay. As professionals, the Venezuelans were high-value targets. $10,000 each for release, wired to specific accounts within 72 hours, or other arrangements would be made. The threats were implicit, but clear. Ángel called his wife in Caracas, heard her scream when he explained. $10,000 might as well have been $10 million in Venezuela's destroyed economy. She'd have to beg from relatives already stripped bare, so everything they owned probably still falls short. He could hear his son asking why Daddy sounded sad. Too young to understand his father walked into a trap disguised as salvation. The warehouse was a special kind of hell. Dozens of migrants in various stages of despair, some whose families had paid, waiting for release that might or might not come. Others whose time had expired, being prepared for other arrangements. Forced labor, trafficking, or simply disposal in the desert. The guards were efficient, not needlessly cruel, but utterly without mercy. This was business. 3 days passed in a blur of terrible food, bucket latrines, and desperate phone calls. Carmen's family managed half a ransom, begged for more time. Jorge's elderly parents couldn't raise anything, their pension worthless. The Morales brother hadn't even tried calling anyone, sitting in silent acceptance of whatever came next. The warehouse filled and emptied as new victims arrived, and others disappeared. On the 4th night, chaos provided opportunity. A fight broke out between guards over payment disputes. Apparently even kidnappers had workplace conflicts. In the confusion of drawn weapons and shouting, someone kicked open a side door that should have been locked. Ángel didn't think, just ran. Others followed, scattering into the desert night, like roaches when lights come on. He heard shots behind him but didn't look back. Ran through cactus that tore his clothes and skin. Ran despite exhaustion, dehydration, the certainty that he was trading one death for another. But dying free in the desert seemed better than whatever other arrangements meant. At least his family wouldn't have to bankrupt themselves for his corpse. Dawn found him miles from the warehouse, lost again but alive. No water, no phone, no idea which direction led to civilization. But the sun rose in the east and Mexico was south, and somewhere between those cardinal points was a chance at survival. He walked through another brutal day, hallucinating from thirst, following power lines that suggested human presence. A highway appeared like a mirage that turned real. Ángel stood on the shoulder, beyond caring if the next vehicle was border patrol, kidnappers, or death itself. A Mexican trucker stopped, took one look at his condition, and made a decision. Gave him water, food, a ride to the nearest town. Asked no questions about the obvious. The warehouse location, the fake officers, the entire nightmare. Some knowledge was too dangerous to possess. In the small Mexican town, Ángel found a Red Cross station that treated migrants without questions. They rehydrated him, treated his wounds, gave him a bus ticket to Mexico City, where the Venezuelan embassy might help. He never learned what happened to the others. Carmen, Jorge, the silent Morales brother, scattered to whatever fates the desert or the kidnappers decided. The journey back to Venezuela took 2 weeks and the last of his extended family's money. He returned home financially destroyed, physically damaged, psychologically scarred. His son didn't understand why Daddy's trip had been so short or why he woke screaming about white vehicles. His wife didn't ask for details about the weight he'd lost or the new lines carved into his face. He found work eventually, teaching mathematics to children whose families could pay in dollars. Not engineering, but survival. The fake Border Patrol vehicle haunted his dreams. That moment of relief when he thought rescue had arrived, the slow realization betrayal, the warehouse full of sordid human inventory. He'd walked into the trap, gratefully, had actually thanked the men who kidnapped him. Sometimes he received messages from other Venezuelans planning to cross. They asked about routes, coyotes, what to watch for. He told them about the fake vehicles, the uniforms that looked real, the perfect English and decent Spanish that made killers seem like saviors. Most didn't believe him. Surely they'd know the difference. Surely real criminals couldn't impersonate American law enforcement so perfectly. But Ángel knew better. Knew that desperation made even obvious traps look like rescue. That people dying in the desert would climb into any vehicle that offered water. That the business of hunting migrants had evolved beyond simple coyotes into sophisticated operations that use America's authority as bait. The Sonoran Desert had taken Carlos and Elena, 2 educated Venezuelans who wanted nothing more than to work and send money home. The fake Border Patrol had taken a rest, sorted them like packages, assigned values to their lives based on their family's ability to pay. Ángel had escaped both deaths but carried both with him. The weight of bodies left under mesquite trees, and the memory of uniformed predators who'd made captivity look like salvation. He never tried crossing again. The $10,000 demanded for his release would have been enough for another coyote, another attempt, another chance at the American dream. But some lessons were too expensive to learn twice. The desert was full of dangers, but the worst wore uniforms and drove official-looking vehicles and spoke perfect English while calculating the value of desperate lives. Ángel Torres had survived both the desert and the warehouse, had learned that sometimes the greatest danger came disguised as rescue, that wolves had evolved to wear shepherd's clothing, that a vehicle marked Border Patrol might be hunting migrants for profit rather than processing. He was home, alive, broken but breathing. Others from his group were statistics, ransoms, or ghosts in the desert. The fake vehicle still prowled somewhere, its operators hunting new groups of desperate crossers. The warehouse still filled with sordid humans. The business of converting hope into profit continued with professional efficiency. And somewhere in the Sonoran desert, real Border Patrol agents did their jobs while criminals in identical uniforms did theirs. The line between capture and kidnapping blurred by tinted windows and desperate trust. 8 Venezuelans had entered the desert seeking America. 2 died of thirst. 6 climbed gratefully into a fake rescue that became real captivity. 1 escaped to tell the story that others wouldn't believe until they too sat in a warehouse, phones confiscated, calling families who couldn't pay, learning too late that in the desert, sometimes the real predators were the ones who seemed to offer salvation. Ángel had been saved by what he thought was Border Patrol. Then he'd learned that salvation and damnation could wear the same uniform, drive the same vehicles, speak the same languages. The only difference was where they took you and what price they put on your life when you arrived. He'd been lucky. His price had been escape. Others were still paying theirs, one ransom or labor hour at a time, in warehouses scattered across the borderlands where fake authority ruled and real authority was nowhere to be found.